Kiseitze, Yudal Del Tashin Chafei. We didn't yet learn a mimer this week on Parshas Kiseitze. Siyat Shmaya Shabbos Parshas Teitze, Yudal Del Tashin Chafei. Kiseitze L'mchama Oivicha v'goymer, when you go out to war upon your enemies, etc. Mevayra Beina Zaken L'chutei Torah, and the Alter Rebbe explains L'chutei Torah. When his boy gam bedrush had more than so bedrush had some tzedek vagois bedrush Rebbe saying the same shalach is. It's also explained the Mamorim of the Mittler Rebbe and the Mamorim the Samach Tzedek and his notes on the Mamorim, and then the Mamorim of our Rabbeim following those Rabbeim. The Isa B'Zoyar, it's brought down Zoyar Shas Sloisa, the time of davening is Shas Krov, is a time of battle. Therefore, the Melchama that the pasuk is referring to is alluding to the battle that we have during davening with our Nefesh Bahamis. Maybe Gamash because of the Alter Rebbe also brings what it says. Yaakov Avinu said about what the land possessions that he took from the hand of the Amoidi by my sword and my bow. The Tirgum Unkelus, and Unkelus translated it. The words Charbi Bakashti Bitslusi Babaosi, with my tefillah, with my requests. Bakashti is a play of Bakoshosi, which can mean request. So what do we see? So we see again that what is in the simple term in Chumash is referring to a war could mean a spiritual war of davening. Behind this means Shmash Kosik. We say it's Al-Machama Goymer Koyal Machama Shabawait Satfila. What it says when you go out to war is referring to the war in the avoid of davening. Moisav Rabbein Hazakon Lafarish Gam Hemshcha Kosik. We say it's Al-Machama Oivicha. The Alter Rebbe continues to explain the continuation of the pasuk when it says the words Oivicha, upon your enemies. After the words Kiseitz Al-Machama, Pirish Kiseitz Al-Machama Zu. Lenatseach Koyach HaMesavish HaMenafshi. When you go out to this battle, what is this war about? To defeat the power of desire that's in his nefesh, to cool it down in the delights of the physical world, and to transform the delight and the desire of the nefesh bahamis to a love of Hashem. So in what type of way is this war waged, and what type of way do you need to take on the nefesh bahamis? Al Oivicha. You need to go higher than your enemy, meaning in this case, you need to seek out the root of the Nefesh Bahamis above. And when you look at the root of Nefesh Bahamis above, you will see that he's not really an opponent at all. Since no bad descends from above, in other words, the way things are above is Shorsham Hutayf. The root of Nefesh Bahamis is good. Its root of Nefesh Bahamis is from the supernal chariot that's in holiness, the oxen face, the eagle's face, etc., etc. These are all the roots for the Nefesh Bahamis, and definitely the Merkav Elyoina that was seen in the visions of Yechezkel. Surely that was good. So the way to deal with the Nefesh Bahamis down here, the way to conquer its taivas down here, is go look and bring up Oivicha. Look at the source of the Oivim above. What is their source in the Merkav Elyoina of Nefesh Bahamis? Moisif Levayer, and he adds and to explain Oivicha. What does it also mean? Upon your enemies. You're going to go to a place that's higher than your enemies down here, because when you're dealing with such a high place, the enemy down here, the way the Nefesh Bahamis is down here, it has no grasp, it has no foothold, has no control over it above. So if I deal with the source above, so then I'm not challenged by the Nefesh Bahamis down here below. Ois base. So now what the Rebbe wants in this mimer is to take the words of the Alter Rebbe and see how this fits in with Pshutish al Mikra, with the explanation of Rashi. So he says, Nois Beis, with Tzarchel Hav, we need to understand, Eich Yasim, Pirush Rabbeinu Hazakim, and Pirush Rashi, Sheb'Mechemes HaReshus HaKosim Medaber. How does this fit in the explanation of the Alter Rebbe about that this is talking about the war with the Nefesh Bahamis, with the explanation of Rashi, that Rashi is talking about an optional war. And the optional war, as we're soon going to say, is because it says that you will capture its captives, and by Melchemes mitzvah, as in conquering the 7 nations, there were not supposed to be any captives captured. So the only case where it could be captives that were captured were in an optional war, a war that's not obligatory. It's not a war against the 7 nations. And therefore, the point, before we get lost in all the details that the Rebbe wants to bring in, the point of the Rebbe's question over here is, how can you say that taking on the Nefesh Bahamis and davening is an optional war? True, this is Pshuta Shel Mikra, but as the Rebbe always wants to connect and show the connection between the spiritual meaning of a pasuk and the simple meaning. And since it's talking about in the simple meaning about an optional war, how can that be reflected as well? The Rebbe wants it to reflect, and he's going to explain how it reflects in the avodah, in the battle with the Nefesh Bahamis during davening. So now the Rebbe, I gave you where he's going with this. Now the Rebbe is going to work through this step by step. Second line in Oiz Hagdim, by prefacing Shaychocha Shel Rashi Shel Melchemes Rishus HaKosim Medaber, that the proof of Rashi that's talking about an optional war. It's where it says that you will capture its captives. Because when you're talking about a battle with the 7 nations in Eretz Yisrael, the pasuk could not have said you will capture its captives. Shari Nemar already says about the battles with the 7 nations, like the shouldn't let any soul live. But when it says when you go out to war, then it will be upon your enemies. In this, when we're talking about that you're going to be over your enemies, we could even in Pshuta Shel Mikra explain that it's talking about not just an optional war, but also an obligatory war. In other words, the Rebbe is going to explain what he's saying. Last line on the page. This pasuk is coming to explain not just the idea that you will capture its captives at the end of the pasuk, and what will happen with the Eishes Yifas Toyar, with the beautiful woman, and so on and so forth. Elo, top of the next page 280, Gam Shayitzia L'Melchama, that going out to war has to be in such a manner of being upon and over your enemies, that the pasuk is directing you, regardless of what type of war, whether it's a war where you have captives or you don't have captives, you have to be over your enemies. You have to know what's on top of them, as the Rebbe is going to explain further. Through that, will you be victorious in the war if your approach is being over them and higher than them. Similar to what it says in Parsha Shoftim about your attitude in war has to be when you go out to war, where you'll see a horse and rider in a much more greater nation than you. You should not be fearful from them. Why? Because the content of the pasuk, this is the message, that you should not be scared of them. Why should you not be scared? So Rashi explains, you look at them, they're a multitude, they're much greater people than you. But in the eyes of Hashem, all of them are like one horse, like Rashi derives from where it says, it doesn't say susim and multiple rechavim. I'm not sure exactly. Merkava is chariots. You don't see multiple chariots. You don't see multiple horses. Just a horse and rider, a horse and chariot. Meaning that this is coming to teach us that we have to look at it from Hashem's perspective. Oivich. Look at it from Hashem's perspective. In Hashem's perspective, they're all like one horse. In a similar vein, We could say over here that the Torah is telling you what should be your attitude when you go out. We could explain what it says over here when you go out to war upon your enemies. The command is that the going out to war should be over your enemies. To contemplate on what the enemy is in its root and its source. Like we said before, that the root and the source of the Nefesh Bahamis, Ein Ra Yerd Mamayla, is in a very high level. Al der Pirish Rashi, Pasuk V'Risus V'Rechav Goymer. This is similar to what Rashi said in the previous parsha, that you need to look at it from Hashem's perspective. This is the way it's from the perspective of Hashem. The same thing in our parsha, Kisei Lemlchama, Oivich. Look at it the way it is above. And if you see all these things, all the negative things down here below, the way it is above, you have nothing but to fear. Through that, the person will lose any fear of a year knuckle and therefore it will be much easier to defeat the enemy, because fear is what's a big issue. Like the Rebbe often brings down in the name of the Frierdiker Rebbe, that when you go out to war, you go out with a victory march. And the question is, why do you go out to war with a victory march? You're not even close to victory. You don't even know what's going on, what's going to happen. Still, you should wait with the victory march until you're victorious. So the Frierdiker Rebbe explains the very going out to war with a victory march, that enables the victory. The same thing over here, this very same attitude of going oivich and realizing their source above allows you to conquer it easier. Move on. It's understood this whole idea to look at the source of all the issues, source of all the enemies, the way they are above, is calls a shayach gambel mochemes choiva. All this is applicable even in a literal, physical battle of an obligatory battle against the seven nations. And since it's applicable also in the obligatory battle of the seven nations, if memele gambel mochama ruchnis, it's also applicable in the spiritual battle of Avodas HaTfilah, that a person needs to battle his Nefesh Bahamis, and he does so by looking and seeing how is the Nefesh Bahamis above and its source and so on. But the problem is that the pasuk is qualifying it in a optional battle. Because of the conclusion of the pasuk, you shall capture its captives. That this doesn't apply by a war in Eretz Yisrael, as we explained to Rashi. Therefore, the simple meaning of the word ki of kisei tzil changes. How does the word ki change? You could translate the word ki tzil when you will go out to war. Another translation is of the word ki is possible to be if. So, if the pasuk would have been talking about an obligatory war, a war against the seven nations, so then ki would mean when. But it's not talking about that. Let's see it inside. It doesn't mean when you will go out to war, because the seven nations need to be fought. Ella, what does it mean? Ki seitzil l'milchama. The meaning of the word ki has to mean ella im teitzil l'milchama. If you will go out to war, kivin shemalchemes harishus hakasav medaber. Since the pasuk is talking about an optional war, so if you're saying if the way you're explaining it is if you will go out to war, how can you say davening is an if? One needs to battle enough Shabbamis. According to this, it's not understood. How does this fit in with the explanation of the Alter Rebbe that's referring to the war? That's in the service of davening. The war of davening is not optional, it's obligatory. It's something that a person needs to do. It's not just an obligation like other obligations, but chayva hayoyser gedola. It's the most greatest obligation. The Rebbe says, that it's even greater. The war against Nefesh Habahamis is even greater than the war against the obligation of doing mitzvahs. Okay, move on. Look, this is understood from what Alter Rebbe explains. The idea of davening is that everyone should offer up as a carbon his own animal soul. To elevate it and to bind it in its root. The element of fire above is the source of the fiery desires and Nefesh Habahamis down here below. And its source, where it's hewn out from, and its basis and foundation, the holy mountains, Merkav El Yoina, the supernal chariot, that Nefesh Habahamis comes from the Pnei Aryeh, Pnei Shoyer, as we mentioned, comes from the lion's face, comes from the oxen face. So how did it become a fiery desire down here? After the descent and the chain descent and becoming enclosed in the 10 ministering angels that are the sediment of the malachim called Eifanim, Nimshach Tanuga Elam Haza, comes down to the lights of this world, Vakoyacham Tesaven, the power of desire. It's also the heat of the fire. And also the Eitzahara is a foreign fire that's burning. You need to elevate Nefesh Habahamis to its root, to its source above, and therefore this is very obligatory, maybe even more than the mitzvahs, as we will also go on to explain further about this obligation.